an unusual Sunday. Mary is leading our parish Eucharist this morning as a priest for the very first time, the morning after her ordination. And this is my last Sunday with you as your associate minister. I retire on the 30th, though I gather there'll be a proper chance to mark that together next week. Paul's asked me to come back. So today isn't that day. But it does mean that I'm coming to the end of a chapter, just as Mary is beginning a new one. New beginnings and something that feels at least a little like an ending. As I was reading the passages set for this morning, I was struck by how appropriate they are for a day like this. A man walking towards something he doesn't fully understand, trusting that he won't be abandoned, and a quiet word from Jesus about small, faithful acts and how nothing done in love is ever wasted. The story we heard from Genesis is one of the most difficult in the whole of Scripture, and I have no intention of trying to make it sound easier than it is. And the passage that we heard tells us right at the start what's going on. God tested Abraham. God didn't punish him, he tested. And that word tested matters because it tells us something about God's nature. God is not one who delights in causing pain, but in this sense, on this occasion, he's drawing out in the most extreme circumstances imaginable a trust that's already been forming over many years. So by this point, Abraham is an old man, a really old man. He's spent his whole life following God, and God has always come through for him, although not always quickly, and not always in the ways he might have wanted or expected. Many years before, God had made an extraordinary promise to Abraham that he would be the father of a great nation, and that through him the whole world would be blessed. The only problem was that he and Sarah had no children, and as year after year went by, that didn't change. They waited, they hoped, they struggled to keep on trusting, and there must have been nights when the promise felt really thin, when they wondered if they'd somehow misheard or misunderstood or been altogether forgotten. Until, against every reasonable expectation, in their extreme old age, Isaac was born. We need to feel the weight of that. This wasn't just the joy of a baby. This was the arrival of everything that they'd been promised and had almost given up waiting for. Isaac wasn't simply a son. He was proof that God kept his word, the future, the living answer to years of prayer and heartache and costly trust. And now, without any warning at all, Abraham is asked to walk with that very same son towards what looks like an ending, towards death, to give back the very thing that proved that God is faithful. And what strikes me isn't just the seriousness of what's being asked, it's what Abraham chooses to do next. The very next morning, he gets up early, gets together some friends, two of the people that work for him, and goes. There's no long argument, no delay. He simply saddles the donkey, cuts the wood, calls Isaac, and goes. Now, that's not the response that perhaps we might expect. And it's not because it doesn't cost him. Abraham does this because his trust in God has been formed so deeply over so many years that it holds even here in this moment. And that walk then takes 3 days. 3 days travelling with his son beside him. 3 days waking, walking, stopping and starting again. Isaac talking, asking questions, probably enjoying the journey, being in his dad's company. And Abraham carrying something so heavy that there are no words for it. You can almost picture it, the ordinary rhythm of the journey, the sound of footsteps on the path, the quiet moments, the conversations that don't go anywhere near the thing that Abraham is holding inside. And then night comes, a fire, a simple meal, Isaac sleeping, and Abraham still awake, watching, carrying it all. Every instinct must have been pulling him to turn around, to choose a different ending, and yet still he carries on. That very often is what faith looks like. There's no sense of clarity always. There's not always a sense of certainty. Often there's just a long walk onwards, and we have just enough trust to take the next step. And then Isaac asks the question his father must have been dreading. We have the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb? Abraham has been carrying this for 3 days, through every shared meal, through every moment of watching his son sleep. And now Isaac is looking at him, trusting with that question. Abraham's answer is remarkable, not for what it says, but for what it doesn't say. He doesn't offer reassurance that he can't guarantee. He doesn't explain. He simply says, God himself will provide the lamb, my son. Now at this point, he can't see how. He has absolutely no plan. He can't explain. He's got nothing to go on except a lifetime of discovering and knowing that God is faithful. So it's the most honest thing he can say in that moment. And it turns out to be true. The angel speaks. The ram appears caught in a thicket. Isaac lives. And Abraham names the place Adonai Jireh, which means the Lord will provide. But the word Jireh carries more than that. It also means to see. The Lord sees. God saw the need before Abraham could see the answer. And the hardest place of all becomes the place where Abraham discovers that he was never, not even for a moment, out of God's sight. And notice how God provides. Not with an overwhelming, all-singing and all-dancing display, but quietly, precisely, just enough, at just the right moment. I'd like to share something of my own, not as someone who has everything worked out, but as someone who's still learning, just like all of you. Before coming here, I was part of planting and nurturing a new church community. We met in all kinds of places: a hall, a park, the pub, walking outdoors, wherever seemed most helpful. We also drank a great deal of tea. I think drinking tea is a requirement of church planting in this country. We prayed together, we laughed together, and we tried to work out what it meant to be a follower of Jesus in that place. Most people there were at the very beginning of a faith journey, but it was alive and real, and it mattered deeply to them and to me. And then, through circumstances beyond our control, that church closed. Deanery reorganisation, a pandemic, withdrawal of funding. The reasons made sense on paper, but the loss was real. And in that season, from my perspective at least, God felt very far away. There wasn't a ram in sight. No sign of an answer, just silence and a long walk down from the mountain, not knowing really whether any of it had mattered or made a difference. But here is what God did. That community didn't disappear. It continued under the leadership of lay people who had been quietly and faithfully serving all along. When everything fell apart, they simply looked at each other and said, "We're not stopping," and they didn't. They kept on serving their neighbours. They kept showing up. They kept on being the presence of Christ in that place. And what God is doing there now has grown out of what we all began together. I couldn't see that at the time, but looking back, it's clear the ram was there. Adonai, Jireh. I imagine some of us could tell similar stories. Times when what felt like an ending didn't turn out to be the whole story. Times when, only with hindsight, we can see how God has clearly provided. These stories matter. They remind us who God is, what God is like. And that's where Jesus' words in our gospel reading land with such weight. After preparing his disciples for hardship, for cost, for difficulty, he ends with something quite simple. Whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of these little ones will not lose their reward. A cup of cold water. A small, ordinary thing. After everything else he's been saying, Jesus finishes here because he's reminding them that nothing given in faithfulness is overlooked. Now, those disciples didn't have much, no power, no security, just themselves and the message they carried. And Jesus wants them to know that what they do and what others do for them, even the smallest thing, really matters. It's seen. It's not wasted. And that speaks directly to us, because most of what holds a church together isn't dramatic. It's the ordinary and the everyday. It's the person who shows up week after week. It's the quiet word offered at just the right moment. The phone call that says, "You're not alone." The welcome given without a fuss. The prayer said at home when nobody else hears it. Perhaps these things may feel small, but they really matter. Not one cup of cold water is ever overlooked. And Mary, if you'll forgive me for saying this aloud, I think that's true of you too. What happened yesterday matters, but it wasn't really the beginning of your ministry. It's right that we celebrate it, but your ordination didn't create your ministry. It's recognised something that God's been forming in you over years. The quiet acts of care that you've done, the walking with people, the faithfulness when it was costly, and the times when nobody else was watching. God saw and noticed every single one, and that's brought you to us here today, doing this. And for all of us, the same is true. Like Abraham, we can't see very far down the road. We don't need to. We just need to keep on walking with the God that we know. Before I draw to a close, I'd like to add just one last thing on a personal note. Those of you who know me well know that this has been a harder year for me than most. I've lived with Emmy for 7 years, and an ME crash earlier this year has made it clear that I need to take steps to allow for more consistent times of rest and recovery. Stepping back from my role as a licensed member of the clergy is the right and honest thing to do, and there will be time to mark that next week. But just because something is the honest and the right thing to do doesn't mean it's always easy to do. But it's made easier for me because I'm not leaving you altogether. I've applied for permission to officiate so that when the time is right, hopefully in the autumn, I can come back and be part of the clergy and retirement team to serve alongside all of you and wherever else God leads us together. We're all, in one way or another, somewhere on that 3-day journey, just as Abraham was. We're often not sure entirely where it's leading us or what's going to happen next. But thankfully, we are not walking alone. God's not finished with any of us. Not with Mary as she begins this new chapter, not with me as I close one, and not with any of you. God has always been faithful and always will be. Adonai Jireh. Amen.